All right, you guys, let's continue our discussion of solving quadratics by using completing the square. All right, let's look at this problem. So it says solve using completing the square, and we have x squared minus 3x plus 1. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is write our problem. Okay, so if we walk ourselves through those steps, step 1 is always to make sure that your leading coefficient is 1. So as we look in front of x squared, that leading coefficient is 1, so we're good. The next thing we're going to do is move the constant term to the other side of the equation. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. I'm going to add in my blanks. Okay. Now we need to find the quantity that goes in each one of those blanks. Remember, to find that, you do b divided by 2 squared. Okay. So b is always the number that's in front of x, the coefficient. So for us, that's -3. We're going to do -3 divided by 2. And that doesn't divide evenly, so we're just going to square both the top and the bottom. So -3 squared is 9, and 2 squared is 4. So we're going to add 9 over 4 in both of those blanks. Okay. Now our left-hand side should factor. Okay. And our right-hand side, we're going to combine. Okay. So when we factor the left-hand side, okay, we're going to draw our set of parentheses. Our variable is going to go in the front. And remember, the value that goes inside of that parentheses is b divided by 2 before we squared it. So our b divided by 2 was -3 over 2. Okay. And then we're going to combine the right-hand side. So that's -1 plus 9 over 4. So that's a whole number in a fraction. So the only way we're going to be able to combine that is if we have a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply the -1 by 4 over 4. So that's going to give me -4 over 4 plus 9 over 4. And when I combine that, that gives me 5 over 4. Okay. All right, so let me rewrite that on the other side. Okay. So it's going to give me x minus 3 over 2 squared equals 5 over 4. Okay, remember now it's set up perfectly to use the square root method. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides. When I do that, it's going to leave me with x minus 3 over 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 5 over 4. Okay, now the square root of 5 over 4 doesn't break down perfectly, but remember, anytime you have a radical over a fraction, so we have the square root of 5 over 4, it's understood that that's the square root of 5 over the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 does reduce to 2, okay? So instead of writing this, I'm going to write the square root of 5 over 2, okay? All right, and I need to solve for x. So that means I need to move this 3 over 2 to the other side by adding it. So I'm going to have x equals 3 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 5 over 2. Okay, so remember that's two answers. The first one is 3 over 2 plus square root of 5 over 2. And the other answer is 3 over 2 minus square root of 5 over 2. Okay. Cool. All right, let's look at another example. All right, let's take a look at this one. So same directions, solve using completing the square, but this time we have 2x squared plus 8x minus 12 equals 0. Okay, so remember step 1 is to make sure that your leading coefficient is 1 before you start. So if we look at our problem though, our leading coefficient is 2, okay? So that means before we begin, we need to divide everyone in this equation by 2. So it's going to give me x squared plus 4x minus 6 equals 0. Okay? All right, now since my leading coefficient is 1, I need to move the constant term to the other side of the equation. So I'm going to add the 6. Okay. All right, I need to get the number that goes inside of that blank. Remember, to find that number, you're going to do b divided by 2 squared. B is going to be the coefficient attached to x. So for us, that's 4. So 4 divided by 2 squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. Okay. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides of my equation. Okay. All right, so the left-hand side of the equation should factor. And the right side of the equation, we combine. Okay, so when we do that, we are going to draw 2 sets of parentheses, and my variable goes in the front. And remember that quantity that goes inside with b, with x, is b divided by 2, okay, before we squared it. So for us, that was 2. And then we're going to combine what was on the right-hand side, which is 10. Okay. All right, now it's set up perfectly to use the square root method. Okay, so we're going to take the square root of both sides. On the left-hand side, that's going to leave me with x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 10. The square root of 10 doesn't break down, it doesn't simplify any farther, so we need to solve for x. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So that gives me x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 10. And remember, that's 2 answers. One of them is negative 2 plus the square root of 10, and the other one is negative 2 minus the square root of 10. Okay, awesome.